The casket was small, too small for a child who once dreamed of becoming a doctor. As I stood by my son's grave, my parents were nowhere in sight. Neither was my sister nor my so-called best friend. While I buried Caleb, they were clinking champagne glasses at a hotel ballroom. And just when I thought betrayal couldn't cut deeper, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "We need the trust documents. Bring them tomorrow." They skipped his funeral but demanded his money. That was the moment I realized their betrayal had only just begun. When I tell you about my son Caleb, I need you to understand who he was before everything went wrong. Caleb was 9 years old, full of questions about the world, the kind of kid who wore superhero pajamas to chemo because he said real heroes weren't scared. He had his father's eyes, the same steady gaze that made you believe things would be okay, even when they weren't. I raised Caleb mostly on my own after my divorce. His father, Ethan, my ex-husband, moved overseas for work, but before he left, he created a trust fund for Caleb. He told me, if anything ever happens, this will secure his future, and if the worst comes, it will protect you, too. At the time, I brushed off his words. I couldn't imagine losing our son. The first signs of illness came quietly. Fevers that wouldn't break bruises that took too long to fade, a tiredness that seemed too heavy for a child his age. I took him to doctor after doctor, desperate for answers. For 8 long months, I was told I was overreacting. My parents, Charles and Elaine, who always cared more about appearances than about listening, called me dramatic. My older sister Victoria, who had always been the golden child of the family, rolled her eyes and said hospitals made her uncomfortable. Even Melissa, my best friend since 3rd grade, who once swore she'd stand by me no matter what, began visiting less and less as Caleb's condition worsened. When the diagnosis finally came a rare blood disorder, it felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. Caleb sat so small in that hospital chair while the doctor explained treatments, risks, and endless medications. My stomach twisted, but Caleb only asked, "Will it hurt?" His voice didn't shake. That was my boy, braver than anyone gave him credit for. The months that followed broke me down in ways I can't fully explain. I learned to sleep upright in hospital chairs. I memorized the beeping rhythm of monitors. I fought with insurance companies and pleaded with specialists. Every moment was about keeping Caleb comfortable, giving him some piece of childhood, while his body fought a battle it should never have faced. And through all of it, I waited for my family to show up. For my parents to step in to be grandparents, for Victoria to keep her promise that she'd always be there, for Melissa to remind me that I wasn't fighting alone. But they didn't come. They sent excuses, half-hearted texts, and on good days a phone call that lasted 5 minutes. Not one of them sat beside Caleb when the treatments made him too weak to lift his head. Not one of them brought food when I hadn't eaten all day. Not one of them stayed overnight so I could go home and shower in my own bathroom. The person who did show up was Angela, my elderly neighbor. She wasn't family, but she cooked meals when I was too tired to lift a pan. She sat with Caleb so I could take a nap without fear. She reminded me gently but firmly that I wasn't invisible. She was the one who brought genuine care into our home, not the people who shared my blood. Looking back now, I see the signs I ignored. My parents brushing off Caleb's illness wasn't just denial, it was preparation. Victoria's distance wasn't just discomfort, it was strategy. They weren't absent by accident, they were absent by choice. And while I was focused on saving my son, they were focused on something else entirely. I didn't know it then, but the moment Caleb's illness became real, they started planning for what might come next. And when the worst finally did happen, their true intentions came crashing into the open. The morning after Caleb's funeral, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My body was heavy, my chest still tight from crying through the night. The house was quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful, more like hollow silence, like even the walls knew what was missing. For a moment, I thought about staying in bed, pulling the covers over my head and ignoring the world. But then I remembered the message from my mother. We need the trust documents. Bring them tomorrow. Tomorrow was now today. I almost deleted the message last night thinking maybe grief had made me misread it. But I hadn't. The words were there, cold and direct, sent less than 2 hours after Caleb's casket had been lowered into the ground. That was the urgency my parents felt, not their grandson's memory, not my broken heart, but a financial document. I gripped the steering wheel too tightly as I drove to their house. Oakwood Heights always looked perfect, trimmed hedges, spotless driveways, the kind of neighborhood where everyone waved, but no one really knew each other. Their colonial-style home stood just as polished as ever, with fresh white paint and matching shutters. It made me sick to think how much energy they spent maintaining appearances while Caleb wasted away in a hospital bed. Melissa's silver BMW was parked in the driveway. My stomach turned. I hadn't seen her at the funeral, but of course, she had time to be here now. My parents' front door opened before I even reached it. My father, Charles, stood in the doorway, his expression carefully arranged into what looked like concern, but his eyes were flat businesslike. "Destiny, come in," he said, stepping aside. "We've been waiting for you." The words hit me wrong. Waiting for me. Not to grieve together, not to talk about Caleb, but to wait for me like I was late to a board meeting. Inside the living room didn't feel like home. It felt like a negotiation table. My sister Victoria sat on the sofa, legs crossed, neatly hairstyled into that perfect chignon she always wore when she wanted to look serious. Melissa was beside her, staring at her nails like she wanted to disappear. My mother, Elaine, hovered near the mantel, her hand resting on a framed family photo that suddenly felt staged fake, like every smile in it had been for show. No one said I'm sorry. No one even said Caleb's name. Instead, my father walked to the coffee table where a folder sat open, papers neatly arranged. He slid one toward me. "We need to reallocate the trust with Victoria as trustee. Sign here and here." For a second, I couldn't process what I was hearing. I blinked at the page, the black print swimming in front of me. "What are you talking about?" I finally asked. Victoria leaned forward, her voice smooth, practiced. "Destiny. You're not in any condition to manage that kind of money. We're trying to help. You've been through a lot." My mother chimed in, her tone, sweet but cutting. "You've always been impulsive with finances. Remember that boutique you wanted to open after college? Thank goodness your father talked you out of it. We can't risk something like that happening again, not with this much at stake." I looked at Melissa, desperate for some flicker of the friend who once held my hand through my divorce. She glanced up for half a second, then back down at her manicure. Her silence told me everything. My father's voice cut through the room. "We've already spoken with Ethan's lawyer. Given your mental state, he agrees this is the prudent course." I picked up one of the papers, my hands trembling. Legal jargon filled the page talk of competency evaluations and guardianship. Then I noticed the dates. Some of the research was from more than a year ago. 14 months ago when Caleb was first hospitalized. "You've been planning this since he got sick," I whispered, my throat tight. Victoria sighed loudly like I was being unreasonable. "You're exaggerating again. That's exactly why we're concerned." My father pulled out another sheet. "If you refuse to sign, we'll have to petition the court for guardianship. The judge will understand that grief has compromised your judgment." The words landed like punches. Guardianship. They weren't just trying to take Caleb's money, they were trying to take control of me. I stared at them, at these people who were supposed to be my family. Memories flooded back in cruel flashes. My mother brushing off Caleb's fevers. "It's probably just anemia, Destiny." My father telling me I worried too much. "These doctors are milking your anxiety." Victoria refusing to visit the hospital. "He's just going to get better anyway. What's the point?" All this time, I thought they were dismissing Caleb's illness because they didn't want to face reality. But no, they were preparing for this moment, waiting for the worst to happen so they could swoop in and claim what was never theirs. I noticed a blueprint half hidden under the trust papers. I pulled it free. Renovation plans, a $200,000 kitchen remodel, a home theater, a luxury pool with a waterfall. "You never even visited him in the hospital." I said, my voice low but steady. "Not once in 8 months." Victoria tossed her head back. "We all grieve differently. Some of us just handle it better." Something inside me snapped. I saw them clearly for the first time, not as parents, not as a sister, not as a friend, but as opportunists circling like vultures. My father's tone hardened. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Destiny. You're not thinking clearly. If you don't sign, we'll take this to court. You'll lose." Victoria glanced at her watch. "We need this resolved within 60 days. Robert's next project financing depends on it." That was it. Their urgency wasn't grief, it was debt. They needed Caleb's trust to fix their own lives. I stood up, gathering the papers into the folder and placing it back on the table. My voice surprised me with its calm. "I need time to think." My father's jaw tightened. "Don't walk away from this table." But I did. I walked straight out the door, their silence following me like a shadow. In the car, I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel, shaking. My phone buzzed. A text from Angela, my neighbor. "How did it go? I'm here if you need to talk." I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I started the engine, the folder of betrayal still sitting on their coffee table. That was the moment something shifted. I knew I couldn't fight this alone, but I also knew one thing with absolute certainty: I would fight, and I would not let them win. 2 days after that meeting in my parents' living room, I sat in the office of Richard Donovan, the trust attorney Ethan once told me to call if anything ever happens. I never thought I'd actually need him. The building smelled faintly of polished wood and old leather books, the kind of place that felt steady, immovable. Exactly what I needed. Richard was older than I expected, silver hair glasses low on his nose, but his eyes were sharp. He shook my hand firmly and didn't look away when I told him about Caleb. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, and for the first time in days, I believed the words. I slid the folder across his desk. "These are the papers my family tried to make me sign." My voice shook a little, but I forced myself to keep going. They didn't even come to Caleb's funeral. And then hours later, my mother texted me about trust documents. Richard adjusted his glasses and began reading. The silence stretched long, but I didn't interrupt. Finally, he pulled open a drawer and retrieved a manila folder with Ethan's name on it. "I remember your ex-husband. He was very clear about his intentions when we set this up." He handed me a notarized statement in Ethan's handwriting. My chest tightened as I read, "This trust is to secure Caleb's future, and if the worst happens, to provide for Destiny, who sacrificed everything for his care." Tears blurred my vision. Ethan might have left for work overseas, but he hadn't abandoned me. Even from across the ocean, he had protected Caleb and me. "Your family has no legal right to this money," Richard explained. "The trust is ironclad. But that doesn't mean they won't try to make your life hell. If they push guardianship, they'll try to paint you as unstable. We'll need to prepare." For the first time since Caleb's diagnosis, I felt a flicker of something other than grief resolve. That night, Angela came over with a stack of journals. She had written in them every day during Caleb's illness. "I thought you might need these," she said, setting them on my kitchen table. "Notes of meals I brought days. I sat with him. Nights you never left the hospital." I hugged her, overcome. She wasn't just a neighbor. She had become more of a mother to me than Elaine ever was. Piece by piece, I began building my own defense. I pulled hospital bills from a shoebox in my closet, highlighting how every cent went to Caleb's care. I printed my calendar showing every doctor's appointment I attended without fail. I gathered text messages where my family brushed off his illness. "Don't be dramatic, Destiny," and compared them with their sudden obsession with the trust after his death. Richard guided me step by step. Document everything. Don't delete a single message. Screenshot their posts. Save every voicemail. Meanwhile, my family moved faster than I expected. Victoria posted on Facebook, "Sometimes we have to step in when someone we love is struggling. Please pray for our family during this difficult time." Mental health awareness. Family first. Hundreds of comments poured in, praising her strength and compassion. Not one mentioned that she hadn't shown up at her nephew's funeral. Then Melissa called one evening. For a second, I thought maybe she regretted her silence, but her voice was stiff, rehearsed. "Destiny, I think you should listen to your parents. You've been emotional. It's understandable, but maybe they can help manage things for a while. I could barely recognize her. My best friend since we were 8 years old, now speaking like a witness giving testimony. Melissa. I asked quietly, "Are they asking you to sign something?" Silence. Then she mumbled, "I have to go," and hung up. The next day, Richard called me. The hospital flagged something. Someone accessed Caleb's medical records without authorization. My stomach dropped. It was Victoria. She used an outdated emergency contact form. It was like being punched. My sister hadn't even visited Caleb when he was alive, but she dug through his private files after he was gone. I pressed my palms against the kitchen counter, forcing myself not to break down. They're going to twist everything I whispered. The nights I cried in hallways, the times I forgot to eat, the times I begged doctors for more options. That's why we prepare, Richard said firmly. We counter their lies with truth. So I kept preparing. Angela gave sworn statements about what she witnessed every night I sat by Caleb's side, every meal I skipped, because I wouldn't leave him. Every morning I held his hand during blood draws. Caleb's oncologist agreed to provide testimony about my diligence, saying no parent had ever been more involved. Neighbors signed a petition vouching for me, some even writing letters about how they saw me leave for the hospital every day. Slowly, the fear inside me shifted into anger. My parents and sister wanted to turn my grief into proof I was unfit. They wanted to weaponize my pain. But I had something stronger. I had the truth and people willing to stand with me. The night before our first formal step, I sat in Caleb's room, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars we'd stuck on his ceiling. "I promised you I'd protect what's yours," I whispered into the quiet, "and I will. They won't take this from us." As if answering me, my phone buzzed with a new message from Victoria. "We're filing tomorrow. This doesn't have to be messy if you just sign." I didn't reply. Instead, I saved the message, added it to the growing stack of evidence, and closed my eyes. They thought I was too broken to fight back. They had no idea what I was about to do. The sheriff's knock came early in the morning. Heavy, deliberate, impossible to ignore. When I opened the door, his face was blank professional as he handed me a thick manila envelope. Destiny Walker. "You've been served." My fingers trembled as I accepted it. The weight was wrong, too heavy for just paper, too light for what it contained. I shut the door behind me and stared at the envelope on my kitchen table for a long time before I finally opened it. Across the top of the first page, bold letters screamed, "Emergency petition for guardianship." My throat closed. They weren't just coming for Caleb's trust fund anymore. They were coming for me. The petition painted a picture of a woman unraveling erratic financial decisions, emotional instability, inability to care for herself. Affidavits were attached, pages of lies dressed as concern. Melissa's name leapt out first. My best friend of more than 20 years had signed 3 pages against me. She wrote about the night I called her at 3 a.m, terrified Caleb couldn't breathe. She described how I broke down sobbing in a hospital hallway. She even wrote about the time I forgot to eat for an entire day, passing out briefly by Caleb's bedside. Moments of human grief. Moments she had once comforted me through, now twisted into evidence that I was unfit. I kept reading, though every word felt like glass cutting into me. My parents included details about my finances, overdraft fees, unpaid bills, savings drained by medical costs. They called me reckless. They claimed my grief had compromised my judgment. Then I saw Victoria's hand. She had taken Caleb's medical records, the ones she accessed illegally, and highlighted every note where doctors mentioned my exhaustion, my tears, my stress. Things I had confessed in confidence, desperate for help, now weaponized against me. The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the counter just to stay upright. I called Richard immediately. "They filed," I whispered. "I know," he said. "The notification just hit my desk." "How are you holding up?" I laughed bitterly. "They're trying to erase me. They're trying to erase everything I did for Caleb." Richard's tone hardened. "Then we'll make sure the court sees the truth. Not their performance. But the fight wasn't just in the courtroom." My phone buzzed with a news alert that afternoon. A local paper had published an article, "Family Seeks Help for Grieving Mother." The photo showed my parents on their perfect sofa, sorrow written across their carefully composed faces. My father's quote was bolded, "This breaks our hearts, but we must protect her from herself." Victoria posted on Instagram next, a photo of us as kids, her arm around my shoulders. Her caption, "Sometimes the hardest thing is stepping in when someone you love is suffering. Please keep our family in your prayers." Mental health awareness. Family first. The comment section exploded with praise. What a strong sister. She's so brave for stepping up. No one mentioned she had skipped Caleb's funeral. No one asked about the timing of their sudden concern. I threw my phone across the couch, my chest heaving. They were winning the court of public opinion, painting me as unstable, before the judge even heard a word. Angela arrived that evening carrying her journals. She set them down on my table with a sharp thud. "Don't let them make you doubt yourself," she said firmly. "I wrote down everything, every day, every night you sat with Caleb, every time you refused to leave his side. They can lie all they want. I've got the truth." Her voice steadied me. "They want to drag me through the mud," I said. "They want to make me believe I really am falling apart." Angela reached for my hand. "Of course you fell apart sometimes. Any mother would. But you never abandoned that boy." They did. I nodded, clinging to her words. But my family wasn't done. That same night, my doorbell camera pinged. I opened the live feed and my blood went cold. Victoria stood on my porch alone, shifting nervously. I debated ignoring her, but something told me to answer. I kept the chain on the door and hit record on my phone. "What do you want?" I asked through the crack. Her voice was soft, almost sweet. "Destiny, please. This doesn't have to be so public. So ugly. If you just sign over the trust, we'll withdraw the guardianship petition. No one ever has to know about your episodes." The word cut deep. Episodes. Victoria leaned closer, her eyes sharp despite her gentle tone. "The night you called Melissa, hysterical. The morning the hospital nearly called child services because you couldn't remember Caleb's last medication. If we show all that in court, you'll be destroyed. Everyone will know how unstable you are. My hands should have been shaking, but they weren't." I felt strangely calm. "You should leave now," I said. Her mask slipped, then just for a second. Rage flickered across her face. "You think you deserve that money. You were always the burden. The problem child. The disappointment. We carried you your whole life. Now it's time you did something for this family." I shut the door without another word. That recording went straight to Richard. His reply came minutes later. Perfect. Exactly what we needed. Still, sleep didn't come that night. I sat in Caleb's room, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, listening to the faint hum of the baby monitor. I still hadn't been able to unplug. "They think they can scare me into giving up," I whispered into the silence. "But they don't know me. They don't know what I promised you." The glow-in-the-dark stars on his ceiling still shone faintly, and for the first time since Caleb's funeral, I felt something stronger than grief. I felt ready. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about proving the truth that I was there for my son every second of his life, and they weren't. And I was about to show the world. Court felt like a place where people pretend to be calm while everything important shakes underneath. I walked in with Richard on my left, Angela on my right, and Ethan's parents behind us. I kept one hand on my locket with Caleb's photo and tried to breathe the way the nurses taught him, before needle sticks slow in, slower out. On the other side of the aisle, my parents sat with practiced sorrow, Victoria straight-backed like a CEO, and Melissa staring down at her purse. No one looked at me. All rise. The judge entered, Judge Marion Peabody, gray hair pulled tight eyes steady. She read the caption, scanned the emergency petition, and looked up. "These are serious allegations. I expect evidence, not theatrics." Her voice cut through the room like a clean line. My family's attorney went first. He talked about spiral instability risk. He pointed to bank statements and highlighted overdraft fees from months I lived at the hospital. He framed it as recklessness instead of what it was, a mother paying for care. He held up Melissa's affidavit and called it credible first-hand concern. He did not mention the funeral they skipped, Melissa testified. She kept her voice small, careful. She said I called at 3 a.m. and cried. She said I once forgot to eat and got lightheaded by Caleb's bed. She said she worried about me. I watched her fingers twist her bracelet, the same one she bought when we were 20. For a second, I wanted to remember us laughing in a dorm room, but the feeling passed. She stepped down without looking at me. My mother testified next. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "We love our daughter," she told the judge. "She is not herself. We only want to keep her safe." She never said Caleb's name. My father did what he always does, measured language, nice suit, strong voice. He said the petition was a painful necessity. He called the trust a volatile instrument in the wrong hands. Each word was sanded and polished. It still cut. When they finished, the judge turned to Richard. "Your response." Richard didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Your Honor," he began, "this is not a case about protection. It is a case about exploitation." He handed up a binder. "We will address each point with documentation." He called the hospital records administrator. The woman explained access logs. She stated under oath that Victoria used an outdated emergency contact form 2 weeks earlier to pull Caleb's complete medical file. She called it a privacy violation. The judge's pen moved quickly. Victoria shifted in her chair. Richard submitted my calendar of every appointment, the nursing notes I was allowed to have, the emails to insurance, the receipts for medications, the nights I signed in at the pediatric floor. He asked the administrator to confirm the signatures. She did. Angela took the stand next. She didn't dress the part. She dressed like herself. She told the court she brought meals, that she sat with Caleb so I could sleep, that she saw me learn the names of drugs and the schedules for labs. She was tired, yes. Angela said steady and clear, but she was competent and fierce. She never left that child. Ethan's father testified after. His hands trembled a little when he raised them to swear in. "My son established the trust," he said. "He told me directly that if the worst happened, it would be for Destiny, because she gave everything for Caleb. He put it in writing with Mr. Donovan." He gestured to Richard. "Caleb trusted his mother. Ethan did too." Richard said a notarized statement of intent on the evidence table. He didn't read it out loud. He let the judge read it herself. The room went quiet. I looked down at my locket. Then Richard said one more item. He played the doorbell camera recording. The audio filled the courtroom. Victoria on my porch, her voice soft, then sharp. "If you sign, we'll withdraw. If not, we'll destroy your reputation. Everyone will know how unstable you are. You were always the burden." My heartbeat thudded in my ears, but I kept my eyes on the table. Across the aisle, my mother's hand flew to her mouth. Melissa stared at the floor. My father's jaw clenched. Victoria flushed red and whispered to the attorney. He didn't meet her eyes. "Anything further?" the judge asked. "Yes," Richard said. He placed a small speaker on the edge of counsel table and played the recording from the coffee shop. Their voices were unmistakable. My mother. "Once the guardianship is approved, we can settle Victoria's mortgage." Victoria. "And pay the contractor for the beach house." My father. "Once we have guardianship, we can use the money how we want. Destiny won't have any say." The judge called a recess. I exhaled for the first time in an hour. Angela squeezed my hand. Ethan's mother whispered, "You're doing great, dear." I nodded and touched the locket. When court reconvened, Judge Peabody's tone left no room for misunderstanding. "I have reviewed the petition, the evidence, and the recordings." She paused long enough that I felt my throat tighten. "This court finds no basis for the emergency guardianship. In fact, the petition appears to be a coordinated attempt to seize control of a trust contrary to its terms. The petition is dismissed with prejudice." Her gaze shifted to my family. "Additionally, I am referring the matter of the unauthorized medical record access to the hospital's ethics committee and to the appropriate authorities. Potential perjury in sworn statements will also be reviewed." The words landed one by one. Dismissed. With prejudice. Referred. Reviewed. Not my favorite words in the world, but today they sounded like protection. The judge looked at me last. "Ms. Walker, You have navigated an impossible loss with care and clarity. Your actions for your son were exemplary. The trust stands as written. I will also sign a temporary restraining order prohibiting contact from the petitioners pending further proceedings." I nodded because I couldn't speak. Tears came, but they were different from the ones at the cemetery. Not light or nothing about losing a child is light, but steadier like a rope I could grip. As we gathered our things, my parents stood as if to approach. A bailiff stepped between us. Victoria sank back into her chair, eyes fixed on some point that wasn't there. Melissa finally looked up. Our eyes met for 1 second. She looked away first. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. A month ago, I would have kept walking. Today, I stopped. "Mrs. Walker, how do you feel?" one of them asked. "I feel like the truth held," I said, "and I feel like my son was seen today." We walked past the cameras. Angela looped her arm through mine. Ethan's parents flanked us like bookends. Richard carried the binder the way you carry something that matters. In the hallway, I took out my phone and opened the last photo Caleb took before he got sick. Baseball cap, crooked grin, too big for his face. I whispered, "We did it, buddy. Not revenge, not victory laps. Just a promise kept." That night, I placed the manila envelope with the judge's orders next to Caleb's stuffed dinosaur on my dresser. I made tea. I answered 24 messages from neighbors who had sat in the back row and clapped only with their eyes. I turned off the porch light and stood in the doorway for a long time, breathing the same slow rhythm Caleb learned for needles. The fight for his legacy wasn't over. Paperwork never ends. But the worst part, the part where I had to prove I was his mother in the ways that count, was over. The echo of the judge's words stayed with me, exemplary care. I didn't need her validation to know who I was to my son, but it helped to have the record set straight. Before bed, I opened the locket, touched the tiny photo, and said what I wish I had whispered at the graveside. When I could barely stand, "I kept you safe as long as I could. I kept your legacy safe when you couldn't." Then I turned out the light and slept through the night for the first time in a long time. Tomorrow, I would decide what to build in Caleb's name. Tonight, I let the quiet be a kind of answer. 1 week after the hearing, I found myself sitting in a financial advisor's office, staring at folders filled with investment options. Just months earlier, I could barely bring myself to open mail, let alone think about money. Now every decision felt like a chance to shape something lasting. This model, the advisor explained, pointing to a chart, would generate enough to fund scholarships indefinitely while preserving the principal. I tapped the paper with my pen. The Pediatric Hematology Fellowship has to be fully funded. That's non-negotiable. The words surprised me as they left my mouth. I didn't sound broken anymore. I sounded determined. The Caleb Walker Legacy Foundation was born that day. With Richard's guidance, the trust became untouchable. With Angela's help, we built a network of volunteers. Ethan's parents took on a role as advocates for grandparents, speaking at hospitals about how to support families like ours. For the first time in so long, I didn't feel like I was just surviving, I was building. 6 months later, I walked into the pediatric blood disorder unit where Caleb spent so many hours. The walls had been repainted with underwater murals, bright blues, schools of fish sea turtles. Kids stared at them with wide eyes just like Caleb would have. A plaque beside the nurse's station read Caleb Walker Memorial Wing. A young nurse approached me. "I'm Jennifer Abrams. I'm the first Caleb Walker scholar. Your foundation is funding my training in pediatric hematology. I can't thank you enough." "You're helping children like Caleb," I said. My smile was real this time, not forced. He wanted to be a doctor himself someday. Jennifer squeezed my hand. "Then we'll make sure his dream lives on." Every board meeting, every grant we approved, every emergency housing stipend we gave to a desperate family, it all became proof that Caleb's story didn't end at his grave. It lived on in every child we reached. 1 year to the day after his funeral, I returned to the cemetery. The path felt different under my feet. I carried fresh flowers, but also something else, Caleb's favorite action figure. The same one I placed on his casket a year ago, the same one the groundskeeper had retrieved for me afterward. I knelt by his stone, tracing his name with my fingertips. I kept my promise, buddy. Your legacy is safe, and it's growing stronger every day. As I stood, a woman approached with a little girl holding her hand. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Are you Destiny Walker?" I nodded. "My name is Sarah. This is my daughter, Emma. She was diagnosed with the same condition as Caleb last year. The specialist funded by your program found a treatment that worked when nothing else did. You saved her life." Emma stepped forward shyly. "Thank you for helping me get better." My throat tightened. I knelt down and smiled at her. "You're very welcome." Watching her run back to her mother, I realized something: family isn't always blood. It's the people who stand with you when the world falls apart. I placed the action figure gently at the base of Caleb's stone. "You taught me courage," I whispered, "and now you're still helping kids be brave." As I walked back to my car, the sun warmed my face. A year ago, I thought betrayal had broken me beyond repair. But sometimes betrayal isn't the ending. Sometimes it's the beginning of becoming someone stronger than you ever thought you could be. And that's the story I needed to tell. Have you ever faced betrayal from the people who were supposed to love you the most? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me for more stories of courage, family, and standing up for what's right.